I am thrilled and honored to bring up our fourth speaker tonight. He is a towering figure in the African liberation movement. In the late 60s, he founded the Junta of Militant Organizations, and then in 1972 founded the African People's Socialist Party. He's the leader of the Uhuru movement, which created the African People's Solidarity Committee that we are a part of and of which this conference was organized by. And he's also a published author of several books and pamphlets, including most recently, One People, One Party, One Destiny. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru. Uhuru. Thank you very much, comrades. And these comrades are hard acts to follow. Mwamba, who reads novels, very novel fellow. I think that this is a real important discussion. The whole issue of drugs and crimes and resistance is important, and I think that this is important within the context of this plenary conference as well, and the growing strength and development of the African People's Solidarity Committee, because it contributes to where it is that we're trying to lead our struggle in this country and around the world. Part of my vision is to see in this period that we live and struggle in today, the growth of meaningful resistance movement among African people here and around the world. That is our task, and that is why the theme of the convention being held in Philadelphia in just a few weeks is that African people have a right to resist. And the reason that I think that this conference and the growth of APSC is so important is because when we talk about resistance and the real struggle that we are making right now to introduce the issue of the resistance of African people in this country, we are also raising the question of national liberation and the question of the existence of nations, the African nation itself. And that is really important. And the stance that the African People's Solidarity Committee takes around this question as you go out in the world, not just as an organization, but in life and with others who you know in various kinds of confrontations, that recognize the existence of the African nation in this country as a part of a dispersed African nation is critical. Because when we talk about resistance, we're talking about resisting the kind of things that have been spoken of in this meeting. The national humiliation of African people. The fact that the police can and do stop African people and just beat them up and don't even, it's not even like they have an arrest. In Philadelphia, what, 200 and some odd thousand people stopped and frisked. And of the 200,000 people who were stopped and frisked, only 8% of them were arrested. So all the others, they were not even arrested. They were not even charges filed against them. And of the 8%, many of them were not charged with for the thing they were stopped for. This is national humiliation. It has nothing to do with crime. It has to do with the issue of class contradiction, struggles for national liberation. That's why you find the concentration of state power in the African community to keep it subdued. People have a right to resist that kind of treatment, and they do resist it in various places around the world. That is a growing phenomenon that we are concerned with. So we want to really reintroduce the question of national liberation, that African people in this country are a part of a dispersed nation. And therefore we have a right to resist. Not only do we have a right to resist, when we pursue this issue and deepen it and make it broadly at least understood as a position, then it becomes increasingly unnecessary for us to say, free Mumia because he didn't do it. Because the fact is, for national liberation, if we are struggling for national liberation, then he had a right and a responsibility to shoot the cop who was brutalizing his brother on the streets. And I know that for some people find that an extreme kind of statement, but no more extreme than the people in Afghanistan who put an IED someplace to fight against American troops. No more extreme than any people who have been oppressed in Nicaragua or Vietnam or any place else. The reason why it does not appear extreme in those places is because we recognize that people are oppressed nations with the right to defend and resist themselves against occupation. And the African community in this country is a part of an oppressed, dispersed nation that is occupied every day of our lives. And when you talk about the police concentration in our communities, you're talking about an occupation. It is an occupation, no different from any other occupation anyplace else. So the struggle is for national liberation. That is a consciousness, that is something that has to be won in the world. That the African people are a nation with a responsibility, and if you can't defend it, say, Chairman Omali Yeshitela said it's an African nation. But the point is that it becomes the basis of our right to resist, because we are an oppressed nation of people. And that is the thing that has to be won also in the conscience of African people. Now, this is not a far-fetched position or statement that I am making. I'm reading now a really good book, a novel, Mwamba. I gave Mwamba this novel. That he wouldn't read. I think it's called A Given Day. And the writer is a guy out of Boston. Out of Boston. And who also lives in St. Petersburg part of the time. Great book. He's the guy who wrote the book about, what's the name of the book that Sean Penn and somebody else played? Mystic River, right? And the novel, I like the book. It's the first white writer I've ever seen that treated African characters with such dignity. And in the book, he talks about this African character who, this was in the 1920s, right? Who meets, he talks about Garvey. He raises the issue. He mentions Marcus Garvey in the book, and he talks about Du Bois and black people who were engaged in struggle, like for civil rights and things like that. I was impressed with that writer's ability to even address those kinds of questions and have the African characters have as much dignity as they did, but it was one that also recognized, like, African people, the treatment of African people, and the right to resist. And the fact is that Comrade Diab, made a point about how the U.S. government commits crimes against us, and how the police, Mwamba talks about, commit crimes against us. But crime is a legal term. It's a legal term. And the state legalizes itself. The state legalizes itself. They're not committing crimes. They are functioning as the bourgeois colonial state against us. When they beat up Mumia's brother, when they put Mumia in prison, when they beat the guys, like in our communities, they are not. Now, sometimes they do commit crimes, when in the sense that they violate the law of the bourgeoisie. The police become increasingly corrupted by the drugs on the streets, right? So much drugs on the street, drug money on the streets, you just buy your cops. Buy cops. Cops themselves become pushers and things like that. That becomes problematic. You see all kinds of issues, emerge and struggles against crime and corruption in the police department, and then they clean that up, right? And now you don't find as much of that kind of crime because the drug problem is concentrated in pill distribution, right? So you got the doctors and other folk who are getting busted for drugs, et cetera, because the drug question is still out there. But crime is a legal definition. And I just want to, as a legal term, and the state legalizes itself. And the question of resistance makes it necessary for us to understand the issue of the nation and the captive and occupied nation. That is a critical question whose time has really come, like in this country. And again, if you deal with the issue of the nation, at the point where it becomes generally understood that that's what we're talking about, even if there's disagreement with it, then the explanation for our actions of resistance, right, achieve another character. So even if people disagree with the struggles that's happening in Afghanistan, they disagree with the resistance of the Afghan people, it is understood that that they are occupied. Even the Americans talk about there being an occupation in Afghanistan. So what has to happen is we have to pursue this question and redefine what it is that our struggle is about. That's why this whole concept of fighting against racism is so absolutely bogus, and it is contradictory, and it places impediments in the struggle that we are trying to make. That's why we say we are an oppressed and occupied nation. Therefore, the question isn't whether or not somebody is guilty or innocent for fighting back against the state. The question is freedom because they are part of an occupied nation. Do you understand what I'm saying? That changes the discussion altogether. And it also explains this activity. There are certain things that define counterinsurgency. And a critical definition of part of the definition of counterinsurgency is resource and population control. That is, every counterinsurgency in the world it concentrates on the question of control of resources and population. That's why in every community you see the police in all the African communities. That's why the occupation, the throwing people into prisons, like you see happening in the African community, is resource and population control is fundamental to the strategy of counterinsurgency, no matter where it occurs. In Vietnam, what was it called? The program where not the Phoenix program, but the places where, where they would take Africans and move them, protected hamlets, and move whole populations, Vietnamese populations, and put them around barbed wire, etc., with the objective of separating them, like from the revolution. They did the same thing in Kenya. Now, in fact, some of what they learned that they did in Vietnam, they learned in Kenya. They take whole populations, and in the housing projects throughout this country, that's what you find with the fences, barbed wire fences and cops and stuff all around them. Resource population control. The reason you found police on every campus in this school campus in this country followed the concept of desegregation. Resource and population control, control of population. That's why, there was not like there was shootings and killings on the campuses that they put police there. They put them there with the so-called desegregation process because they were bringing Africans onto those campuses, and they were there to protect the white teachers and the students for the job that the teachers had to do in terms of the terrible activity that targeted African young people. And I can't say enough about the whole school system. The thing is that the fundamental contradiction that African people are confronted with in this country is that our right to self-determination has been taken away from us. And when you look at the fact that people talk about, they say, well, Slavery was bad. We ended slavery, quote unquote.